It's a special episode of the Past This Week, where each On This Day event takes place between the years 1830 to 1835. The 5-year period saw the first steam locomotive, the signing of the Indian Removal Act, and the rise of abolition movements. Music stars of the day were Berlioz, Chopin, and Mendelssohn. Pop tunes included My Country 'Tis of Thee and Mary Had a Little Lamb. Best-selling books included novels by Hugo, Pushkin, and Shelley, and a first collection of fairy tales by Hans Christian Andersen. Western fashion could be summed up as wide at the shoulders and hips and narrow at the waist for men and women. Children dressed as mini-me's of their parents, and the most popular English baby names were Mary and John. America had its 7th president, Andrew Jackson. William IV, son of George III and uncle to Victoria, was King of England. Russia had Tsar Nicholas I. The German Confederation had Francis I, Emperor of Austria. The Qing dynasty in China was trying to push back against Western encroachment, and Japan's Tokugawa shogunate was closed to the West. And, in the Kingdom of Hawaii, King Kamehameha III sat on the throne, attempting to modernize while keeping his nation intact. On July 29, 1835, Hawaii's first sugar plantation was begun at Koloa, Kauai, when Ladd & Company's American founders leased approximately 1,000 acres from King Kamehameha for $300 a year. They hired native Hawaiians, housed them on the plantation, and paid them in company currency that could be redeemed at the company store. The single crop system they started would last for a century. Before 1835, small family operations processed sugarcane that grew wild on the island, but the sugar wasn't exported on a large scale. Ladd & Company's plantation was so successful that more and more people came to begin their own, and as a result, the native population was decimated by disease brought to the island from abroad, and by the end of Kamehameha's reign, the population was a fraction of what it had been in 1778, when Captain Cook discovered the Sandwich Isles. It may not have been on July 30th, but it was definitely the summer of 1831 when Cyrus McCormick demonstrated his mechanical reaper in Virginia. A reaper is a horse-drawn machine that harvests grain. McCormick's reaper could harvest as much wheat in one afternoon as a dozen workers by hand. The reaper he demonstrated in 1831 was a prototype, but he continued to improve it, eventually opening a factory in Chicago. It was one of the most important inventions in farm history, allowing farmers to grow and harvest large commercial crops, especially in the wide-open lands of the American Midwest, which became known as the nation's breadbasket. On the evening of July 31st, 1834, thousands of enslaved Africans dressed in their finest and gathered at churches throughout Jamaica to celebrate the proclamation of liberty to the captives. The bill for the abolition of slavery within the British Empire was read, declaring them free from slavery on August 1st. The former slaves' year of Jubilee was 300 years in coming. Christopher Columbus had landed in Jamaica in 1494, and everything went downhill from there. The Spanish colonized the island, and after they caused the indigenous people to become extinct, they brought in slaves from Africa. When the English took over in 1655, they made the island a vast sugarcane plantation and rum distillery, which required even more slaves, who were eventually freed on August 1st, 1834, when Britain's Slavery Abolition Act went into effect. The Act of Parliament ended slavery in most British colonies, freeing more than 800,000 people in the Caribbean and South Africa. It also made Canada a free territory for fugitive American slaves. While there was a large abolition movement in Britain, slavery was ended mainly for economic reasons and fear of slave uprisings. However, it did end 31 years before slavery was ended in Britain's former colony, America. Meanwhile, in France, there was an ongoing conflict between republicanism and monarchy, leading to the July Revolution and to Charles X, the last Bourbon monarch, giving up his throne on August 2, 1830. France had gone from the Revolution of 1789 to the rise of Napoleon as emperor to the restoration of the House of Bourbon in 1815. But when King Charles got too big for his britches and suspended freedom of the press, 4,000 barricades manned by 30,000 revolutionaries went up in the streets of Paris. The result was the abdication of Charles and the creation of the constitutional monarchy of Louis Philippe, who would himself be overthrown eventually. On August 3, 1833, the HMS Beagle, carrying a 22-year-old Charles Darwin, reached the mouth of the Rio Negro in Argentina. Darwin explored the pampas there with local gauchos. He was exhilarated by the carefree independence of their cowboy lifestyle, but also unsettled by the acts of indigenous genocide they told him about. Darwin's voyage of discovery aboard the Beagle was expected to last for 2 years, but it ended up taking 5, from 1831 to 1836. He returned home with a 770-page diary, 1,750 pages of notes, thousands of specimens, and ideas we are still talking about. And finally, on August 4, 1830, a plan for the new city of Chicago was unveiled. It's hard to imagine Chicago without Lakeshore Drive and the Bean, but in 1830 there were fewer than 100 residents in the area that would become the Windy City. Some thought the area had potential as a water transit hub, though, so after Native Americans ceded the land to the U.S. through treaty, surveyor James Thompson was hired to create the first plat. Thompson methodically laid out the town with straight streets all 66 feet wide, which was the length of his surveyor's chain. After 1830, a city was built practically overnight as settlers flocked to the rich farmland in the area, which also attracted Cyrus McCormick, who built a mechanical reaper factory in the new city. Thanks for listening. Join us next time for more bite-sized history.